Hi, welcome. This is Sharon McDonald with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and I'm delighted to have you all here with us today, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to highlight a community that we highlighted at our July conference to much acclaim. Spokane, Washington is going to talk about how they are transforming their homeless service system. The speakers, Sheila, if you could turn the slide to the next page, will be Sheila Morley with the City of Spokane Community Housing and Human Services, Jackie Thompson with Catholic Charities, Marilyn Nelson with Transitional Programs for Women. Did I get everybody's name right?
You did.
Okay, great. So first, just a quick recap. I know many folks on the line know this by the back of their hand, but the core components of rapid rehousing, we need your help because a lot of folks are still confused sometimes with it. It's all three activities. It's providing assistance to individuals to help them identify housing opportunities. It's providing financial assistance to help them pay for the rent in order to move into housing, and it's providing the follow-up services. So many times you must have heard it, people think that it's providing rent and moving on. That's not rapid rehousing. You're supposed to do the follow-up work. Or you provide rent and you're not helping them find housing. Well, you really should be doing all three. So if you can help us, it's all 3 points. We're going to take a broader look today beyond just rapid rehousing, because when you're doing rapid rehousing to a larger scale, you're really changing all the other parts of your homeless service system. So ideally, your shelter system hopefully is working more efficiently, because as you're able to move more people out, hopefully what you'll see is the shelters are able to admit more people, and you have fewer turnaways. Another big source of change for folks is transitional housing. And I think that as rapid rehousing is growing and people are getting more comfortable and confident in that model for many people, the question is, where do we want to put some of our longer term and frankly, more expensive resources? So communities are rethinking their use of transitional housing. That can be, this is one example that I've posted here. This is a summary of a document that was developed by the Alliance with USICH, with HUD, with HHS, with the VA, and with the Department of Justice Office of Violence Against Women about when does long-term congregate transitional housing, by that what we mean is people who are going to have a long-term year or more stay in transitional housing. When does that make sense? And really it appears that that makes sense. The research indicates that might be appropriate for small subsets of populations with severe needs that want such an intervention. Other uses of transitional housing we're exploring include providing as more interim housing, providing a relatively short-term place for folks to stay as they're working with their colleagues to find new housing. So just a quicker exit out of homelessness. So anyway, the role of transitional housing is moving, is shifting as folks are transforming their homeless service system. So I think this is a great opportunity to kind of have one case study and see what that looks like in Spokane, Washington. But just as a reference, I want to let you know about other webinar series. If you could turn the page, Sheila. And these are just webinars that's on our website if you're interested. So we dive into best ways to look for housing, how are people structuring financial assistance, how are people delivering rapid rehousing case management, how are folks expanding and ramping up their rapid rehousing. So those are living resources on our website, and I have a link to that. That you'll be able to get. Some housekeeping pieces before I turn it over to Sheila. The PowerPoint will definitely be available, so you will get that. Second is that I'm not able to answer raised hands, but if you could use on that little box to your right, the little webinar box, if you click in there to write your questions. I will pose those questions to any of the presenters after. So each person's going to take about 10 to 15 minutes, and we've reserved some time towards the end to sift through those questions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague Sheila.
Thank you, Sharon, and thanks to the Alliance for having us speak about our system today. So just over the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to talk about how we in the city of Spokane have really transformed our homeless service systems with our family system, and really go over the changes that we've made at a community level that really started about 4 years ago. And we're going to talk about the programmatic changes, and then our other two speakers will get into some detail at the program level, how we're using our housing inventory, and then some intentional adjustments in funding that we've made at the city level to focus more on permanent housing. Those adjustments have really made an impact on the system, and we're really trying to maximize the number of homeless families we can use with the current resources, and really focusing on exit permanent destinations. What I think that is really important for us, at least for us to look at here, is that the results that we found and the things that we're learning, they aren't a result of an infusion of additional funds. This has all been things that we've managed within our own funding structure, and I wanted to just kind of give you some stats on Spokane County and the city of Spokane to give you an idea of kind of the area that we are. Our funding picture through the city, we have about $3.5 million in continuum of care funds. Another annually about $500,000 from Washington State funded consolidated homeless grants, and then we get about $800,000 locally in funds generated from a real estate recording fee. And because of where we are in the city, in the state of Washington, which is kind of the blue star on your screen, we don't see people have the idea that Washington has tons of additional funding. Over on our side of the state, we don't see a lot of private funds that are being supplementing our government funding. So we're really kind of here working on within our current funding limitations. So I wanted to give you an idea of kind of where this started. In 2009, really community-driven discussions and planning started to develop a coordinated assessment system and really examine how rapid rehousing resources could be used within our homeless system. We implemented HPRP, as many of you did, and we allocated 40% of those funds towards rapid rehousing. In 2010, we continued our community planning for coordinated assessment. We started learning a lot from the implementation of HPRP, and we had one access point and one screening tool that was developed for those rapid rehousing dollars. In 2011, with our funding that came from the state, they put in a requirement that anyone receiving those funds would develop a coordinated assessment system, and so we kind of stepped it into high gear and started the final planning for coordinated assessment. At that point, we decided we would start with our family homeless system, and we started moving at that time. So the family coordinated assessment system started in October of 2012. So I wanted to give you just an overview of kind of what our system looked like prior to the implementation of coordinated assessment. Here we go. So every agency, so we have every emergency shelter and transitional housing agency had their own wait list. Families would contact each agency separately to get on their list. And at that point, the minimum was about 3 months for a placement into one of those programs. Families moved into whatever unit opened up first with really no consideration of what the best fit was for that family. And then at a 3-month point, it was kind of a seamless transition from emergency shelter into transitional housing. It was, you know, it was a system that had been working in Spokane for a long time. But what we were doing actually is serving the people that had the highest resilience, that could really make it through that process of getting on a wait list and checking back, and really not those that had the highest needs. Managing wait lists, as many of you program people know, is a huge administrative burden, and we really wanted to move away from that. So the system that we created was able to kind of expedite this process, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. One of the things that we had in the system that was a huge gap at that point was very few options for permanent housing exits out of the system. So I wanted to give you a snapshot of kind of what our inventory looked like, our point in time, and the total number of households that were served in temporary housing. So this is prior to, or right at the very end of implementation of our coordinated assessment. I'll get back to that. So we've had coordinated assessment for about 6 months, and things really started to get interesting. So we were able almost immediately to identify that there was a mismatch of units and the need in the community. We had, at that point, we were managing wait lists for emergency shelter and transitional housing units separately. And we would have a long list for clients that needed emergency shelter and a very short list or empty beds in our transitional housing units. So that was a huge concern for us. So we all got back together as a group and really talked about how could we best utilize these our units. We didn't want units available when there were wait lists for families. So we part of our process with our system change is that we have learning communities every month to talk about how things are going, bring concerns to the table. So this concern was brought back to the learning community and then back to our continuum of care. And what we came to is something that Sharon mentioned in her intro, is that all of our providers that were providing shelter and transitional housing agreed to an interim housing model. So they agreed that they would take anyone that was referred through coordinated assessment, and they would adjust their program model to fit that client's need. So that was kind of our first step in pretty big system change, and that immediately changed our unit capacity issue. So let me go to the next slide. So in 2013, I'm going to give you a snapshot of kind of where we are there. 2013, we continued to see some revisions. We got chosen Ending Family Homeless pilot, which provided some additional technical assistance from Commerce. It was a rapid rehousing program for TANF households, and really that collaboration that came from that really brought some strong connections with our Department of Social and Health Services. And it really started our conversation about using progressive engagement methodology. And that kind of is through 2013. I'll let you look at our snapshot. So we're seeing a few things that have changed. Our point in time numbers dropped a little bit. Our housing inventory is shifting a little more towards permanent housing, or a little bit more towards permanent housing, and the total households that we were served through our system increased quite a bit. In 2014, we were really seeing some great results from households receiving rapid rehousing using progressive engagement, and we wanted to really kind of enhance those resources. So we had some short-term goals and some long-term goals around that. Long-term, we started working on reallocating continuum of care funds towards rapid rehousing, and those take about a year or two to actually implement. So we needed to make some more immediate changes in our funding structure. So as we looked at our funding, when you're adding more money towards rapid rehousing, that means that we were reducing funds in other parts of our system. So kind of how our providers reacted to that was really kind of innovative. We're really fortunate to have a group of providers that can get in a room and really talk things through about how to keep their facility programs going, which is a huge need in the community, and also support the infusion of the rapid rehousing shift. So our main rapid rehousing provider, who you'll hear from next in our presentation, provided cross-training to all of our interim housing program staff, and really they integrated a rapid rehousing model into the interim housing program. So as soon as a person would identify that needed rapid rehousing, they would be placed into an interim housing location, and the workers would immediately start working on housing placement through landlord connections, and really working to connect them immediately to the rapid rehousing resources. So that was one way to keep the shelter staff and the transitional housing staff intact, but also shifting that focus towards a more permanent housing exit. Another shift that we did, and I think I talked about this, is we shifted 2 of our continuum of care transitional housing programs that were really functioning as a rapid rehousing program. We reclassified those in our 2014 competition to rapid rehousing. And the final adjustment we made in 2014 was really fully implementing all components of progressive engagement kind of throughout the system. We allow families in rapid rehousing that are currently being served to receive financial assistance and other assistance, and provide that safety net for families once they're housed, if they become unstable, to be assisted again prior, so they don't have to exit the homeless system and go back through shelter or some other temporary housing situation. One of the great changes that happened in 2014 was a leadership change at our housing authority, which really has helped us, and the new leadership came in really strongly wanting to support our local 10-year plan, and really has come to the table to be a great partner with our homeless system. So that's been a great response. So I'll give you a snapshot of kind of where we looked at the end of 2014. We again shifted more of our resources towards permanent housing. Our point-in-time count for households with children continues to drop, and I think the most exciting stat that we have is really the amount of families that we've actually been able to assist through the system with the same amount of money. That's been a significant change. So we're in 2015. We're almost at the end of 2015. We're still kind of making system change, because that's what we do. We moved to a prioritization model. We implemented a new assessment tool, and we're trying to really move the system towards ensuring that households with the highest barriers are those receiving homeless services. We continue to have challenges and gaps in our system. One of the things that I don't know if this is unusual for other communities, but prior to 2012, we had a perceived identified gap of needing additional permanent supportive housing units for chronically homeless households with children. And as we started coordinated assessment, with that infusion of those units, we struggled to get built. So we're still looking at that, and we've made some changes in our 2015 continuum of care application to actually reallocate some of those resources and move that money towards a more identified need with our chronic homeless population. We're always looking at ways to enhance our coordinated entry system with we're looking at funding a new diversion component. Landlord identification and support is always continues to be a concern with us here, and I think Jackie will talk about that a little bit more. And we continue to kind of identify gaps in the system through our coordinated assessment. If you look at, we implemented a VI SPDAT in last year, and the two circles on your screen show kind of where we're seeing our gaps in the system, where we're not able to serve everybody within these gaps. And we're looking at readjusting our funding to help fund those gaps. So kind of the summary, I would say, just in general, retooling your home assistant really doesn't require, at least for us, it didn't require a huge infusion of additional funds. I think the first step is implementing coordinated assessment that really works for your community. Bring all the stakeholders to the table and provide data on what you're learning. I think that's been one of the strongest things, is if we can bring the data back to the table and show this is really what's happening, it's much easier to get buy-in from that. And really be prepared to have difficult conversations. We've had some really interesting conversations at the table and huge concerns, but as a community, we've been able to work through those. And I think flexibility is huge. And I would say don't wait until you think you have it all figured out to start moving forward, or you'll never start. So those are my suggestions for communities that are just starting to move forward. So I wanted to, and here's my contact information if you have any questions for us after the webinar. And I think I'm ready to hand this off to our next presenter. And would you like me to do that, Sharon?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll introduce Jackie.
All right,
yes,
great. Thanks, you guys.
Okay.
And thanks for having me, everybody that's listening. So I'm going to talk about the basics, because I do the frontline work of rapid rehousing every day. So I do want to apologize. I've had to be in office, so if you hear any background noise, I do apologize, but it is pretty busy. Go ahead and switch the slide.
Okay.
And this one is just really a very, very basic, broad outline of what I'll talk about today and what we do and what we find really important to be in our program guidelines. And I'll go over each one of these specifically. So go ahead and switch the slide again. So when you're looking at the front line, I'm really going to kind of go into detail of what we require of participants. So as Sheila explained, we get all our referrals through that coordinated entry system. So it's people who have assessed and qualified for rapid rehousing that come to us. And then we get into the nitty-gritty and let them know what's going to be required of them if they want to participate in our rapid rehousing program. We require a 30-day deadline housing search, and that starts the day that they're signing off on the program agreement. We do allow for extensions, but they really have to be pretty specific. So medical needs, obviously, if you can't look for housing, we're not going to ask you to do that. It's really 30 days to identify a unit. So if it's not move-in ready, if it's going to take a week or so for the landlord to clean the carpets or something like that, we're very understanding of that. And then, of course, we work with people who have vouchers, which is a really great idea of rapid rehousing, is to help people move in with deposit-only assistance. And we do allow for a little bit more time frames in that if needed for options to be set up for those vouchers to go through. And then throughout all of this, and I couldn't reiterate this enough, it's a continuous process of reevaluation. I think in our field, we believe that these homeless families are coming through with this huge need, but sometimes we aren't the best fit for them. So we constantly reevaluate and constantly ask them, is this the right program for you? This will be asked of you. Is it still a good fit for you to be in this specific program that's asking this specific things of you? Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so when we look at putting someone in housing search, we of course want to give them as many resources as we can. We do have a list of landlords, and we have accumulated that over the years. And with that landlord list, it's landlords we have worked with before, and it's gotten to the point where landlords do call us with openings as well that we update clients with. We also give We also have the ability to have customers use our computers to look up not only jobs possibilities, but also look on Craigslist or any other websites that we've suggested for them to look up potential sites that they want to do. And we put together ourselves an outline of the program to give to landlords, so the client can actually bring that with them to a potential landlord and say, this is the program that I'm working with. Does it work for you guys? Because time and time again, we have found that it's pretty hard for even ourselves, let alone a client, to describe which program they're in, because there is just so many. So we found that to be really helpful. And of course, it has our contact information on it if they want to call us directly and ask us any kind of questions. It kind of gives us that immediate line of contact to let them know what we'll be offering for this potential client. We also come up with little things that we've found over the years. So it's not only a continuous process of assessing the client's need for a program, it's assessing the program and how it's going and everything like that. So it's a continuous process of revamping it and making it better. And all of these things were, just like Sheila was saying, it wasn't that we perfected it and started it. We're continuing to do it as we go. And these talking points or these questions that we've put together to have a client ask the landlord have been really helpful. Such things that we forget to ask when we're renting as well. Do you allow dogs? What do the utilities usually cost every month? Is this something that I can afford long term is really, of course, what we're looking for. And then our program and rapid rehousing in general is really, really client-led, to the point where the client, it's in their hands to really go out and look for an apartment that works for their household. We give them the guidelines, but then we really say and believe you can do this on your own. Let us know if you need assistance, but really go out and try it, see what you want, see what you don't want, and then come back to us with your feedback or a potential landlord, and let's move forward. Go ahead and hit the next slide. With our guidelines, we let the client know right away what they've qualified for, and it's based off of fair market rates, which are for every region, and it's based off of HUD requirements. And HUD has, each grant can allow for certain specifics on what someone is allowed, allotted for bedroom sizes based on their household composition. HUD specifically only allows, no matter what the sex is, 2 heartbeats per room. And we go off of those guidelines to let them know right away what they've qualified for. We put it on our program agreement so that it's in black and white, how many bedrooms they can get and what is the fair market rate for that bedroom size, so that they can really hone in on what they're looking for that we could subsidize and accommodate for. We do and have done exceptions for FMR, but we want it to be rare, because the idea of HUD's FMR rates are to be sustainable. It's to be sustainable for your area for someone of this household size. So we, of course, want to, well, we want to not put someone in something that they couldn't sustain for a long period of time. The exceptions are made, but they have to do 3 things, really. So we have to try and negotiate with the landlord, and I really have to say you'd be surprised how many landlords are willing to bring it down to the fair market rate. It's usually not too much above it, so maybe $50, $45. You would be surprised just by asking how many landlords are willing to accommodate for that. We don't do exceptions if they've only looked at one place. So they found one place and they're not really looking at anything else. They really have to look at multiple units and kind of be denied or have found it not to work multiple times to really make that exception go through. And then the main one, we want to ask the client, do you feel comfortable paying this amount, which is over the recommendation? Do you feel like you can sustain that? Because we can only be here for a short amount of time. Can you sustain that? And then, of course, we ask that they sign off that they feel like they are comfortable with doing that. And then and only then do we make that exception to those FMR rates. Go ahead and go to the next slide. One thing we always reiterate, because there just are so many programs out there, And we want to make sure the landlord knows this, the client knows this, and then of course every single case manager and person working with them knows that it's really not a voucher. It's very short term. We're not a party to the lease at all. And really it's the idea that we kind of constantly reevaluate every month on if more assistance is needed. So it's always the idea, letting the landlord know and letting the client know this isn't a voucher. It's totally based on the idea that you've qualified for a program, that you only need short-term assistance and you can do this on your own. So let's try it out and see what happens. And it really is short-term assistance. The grants we have right now range on how long we can have somebody in and the average is 1 to 6 months. And we do have them meet with us every month, early, of course, before rent's due, and reevaluate to see how they're doing on how much they're going to contribute and how much we're going to contribute. And really that happens every month. And the main thing I could not stress enough is keeping that landlord in the loop. In the beginning, we just got kind of overwhelmed and weren't keeping the landlord in the loop enough. And with the idea that the client's portion might increase every month in a perfect world, and our amount decrease, with that change in the amounts we send them every month, they really have shown such appreciation of knowing that every month, which is really understandable. And of course, we think back now on how come we didn't think about that, but it really has helped with the idea of like, you're going to get this much from the client this next month and you'll receive this much from us, and really having them involved in that conversation. We also offer budgeting and vocational services to really make it kind of a coordination of care. And of course, we factor that in, and it all kind of really goes together, of course. Like, how are you going to maintain this unit once we can't help you anymore? So we go over goals for the next month, what they need from us, and what we hope to see from them, really. It's this whole intertwined idea of like, how's everything going, and constantly reevaluating what needs to happen for this client so they can be really successful on their own. Go ahead to the next slide. So of course, we get into the case management, which is progressive engagement. And I would just admit right off the bat, I was very skeptical of progressive engagement and its idea. And I have come full circle, and I really could not embrace it more. It really builds off the idea and the belief that you believe the client already has what they need to be successful without you. I think we have a hard time letting go of that piece of like, well, I think they might need me. It's really the idea that we're so short-term, it's so fast-paced that they really can be successful, and the numbers show it. Really, the stats show that they can be successful, and they really are. So it's really believing that they can be is my idea of what progressive engagement is based off of. The real definition of progressive engagement is the idea of the lightest touch. So you can always add more, but you can't take it away, which is of course based on statistics. And I remember reading this article that just put it full circle for me, which was the idea that the longer someone is in cares through states or federal, anything like that, the more they're in institutions, the longer they're in institutions. And really, it just came full circle to me to understand the shortest amount of time someone can be in there is where you see the best results. So we're really not doing anyone any favors to keep them in longer than they need to be. So it's the idea of trying it out with a little bit, the lightest touch, seeing how it goes, and then reevaluating. Seeing how it goes and reevaluating. And the stats show it. It really absolutely works. We base our initial case management on this question: how much assistance do you think you need? We have the idea and the grant written that says the maximum assistance we can provide, but we don't necessarily give that information up. We want the client to really own how they want this case management to go with us in this program for them. And if they say a number that's kind of outside the scope of our practice, we definitely let them know that right away and see if it's a good fit for the program and see if they're really ready for this program, or if we need to kind of talk about a different referral. but I would honestly say 99% of the time they give us a number that is well within the scope of our practice and usually even less than I had imagined for them. And we run with that. So we base the housing stability plan on that, and we base progress on that. Like, how are you doing? You know, initially you said you needed about 3 months of assistance. How's that going? And we reevaluate that every month and really base our program on what they have owned and they have said that they would need to be successful on their own. And absolutely it builds on what the client already had, those resiliencies and those strengths that they've had to do everything that they've done and everything that they've done in homelessness every day. And really just highlighting those strengths is such an important feature of case management all around, which of course we all know. And in our own lives, we can feel it every day, like the tiniest little bit of encouragement. You're like, oh yeah, I have done that, and I can do that, and I can be successful. And that is definitely what we base our case management on here. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's some of the things that we've been able to do because of the grants, the little bit of leniency that we do have with our grants, the things that we found to be really, really successful. We are able to provide application fees and double deposits. Something to keep in mind with those double deposits is they do have to be fully refundable. So they have to have the possibility of going back to the client if they move out. So it's the idea of that kind of one last effort that could go back to the client to use on another unit. And landlords have been really responsive to that, even with it being refundable. And of course, full communication with everybody involved. There's full communication with landlords. We act as liaisons on, of course, the client's part and the landlord's part to talk back and forth, have open communication. We always ask the clients what we can share with the landlords, but really the majority of the time they just want this full communication so everybody's on board and everybody can know what's going on. And then of course with the landlords we want to update them monthly on what kind of payment's going to be coming through, what that's going to look like for them, and really how our progress is going and what the landlord should expect to see. When it comes to the clients, it's the same idea. We want them in full communication with what we're expecting of them and what the landlord's expecting from them, and any kind of knowledge base that they describe they need, we want to encourage them to look into that. So landlord-tenant laws is always one that comes up, and they're so specific sometimes that we're not going to all know every single one of those things, but we'll encourage the clients to know more about that every time and anything else that they feel would make them successful in the program. But really it's the idea of open and full communication all around to let everybody know that we're here, we're willing to help, and we're willing to make this work however we can. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is just an absolute brief idea of kind of the cost analysis of rapid rehousing. For our households, we have found an average monthly payment of around $700 for that household, and really an average time in the program of less than 90 days, which I'm sure you guys could see on a program level is absolutely the least expensive way to go, even if unfortunately the client exits and does come back through. It's still a really cost-effective way to really try out a program with a family that does have such great outcomes for and exiting into permanent housing. And beyond that, we have seen extreme success with short-term help. In April, as you can see, the reoccurrence rate, so the recidivism rate of people coming back through, was less than 5%. So it's just a really cost-effective way to, as Sheila's saying, not have extra funding have to come in to support this, but really use this funding to support more families than we were able to do in a less kind of cost-effective program. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So things we've learned and continue to learn, I cannot stress that enough, is that the landlord relationship is really key. And it really, and I don't want to pretend that that wasn't a hard component. So getting landlords on board is always going to be a battle, and it does take a little bit of time, but I can tell you right now the #1 key factor that I've seen is not me going out and talking to landlords or the city or commerce or anything like that. I can honestly say it's at a case manager level. It's that connection with that case manager and that client and that whole circle of communication between the three that has done so much improvement in getting our landlords on board. They know this, they know the case managers. They don't know me at all, to be honest. Like, they know the case managers by name. They call them directly and they say, I have this open unit. Here's kind of the family I would want to come in here, but we can also negotiate with that, which of course is the ideal for a program like this. I'm not going to say it's always easy. There's definitely landlords that we've had on our go-to list that have called us and said they need a break, but I can honestly say that they've come back around as well. We do everything we can to apologize and try to support as much as we can with that liaisoning piece, but there really is only so much we can do after things don't work out as well as they should, but really it's successful, and that is just a core piece in getting that landlord relationship, is really putting the case managers kind of out there and having that personality that really works with open communication with those landlords and really creating that relationship of trust and honesty, and that we're not looking to house people just to house them, but we're looking to really maintain their housing with this landlord. And then all around, of course, is this clear understanding of guidelines and expectations. So with the case managers, with the clients, and with the landlords. So really understanding, because we do have an ever-changing system that is working to constantly improve, guidelines and expectations do change. And when those happen, we do get together right away. This is changing. This is what it's going to look like. And really having case managers on board with that change is hard, but it's inevitable, and it really is the idea of it's trying to make it better system. We're learning as we go and just understanding all the way around that everybody knows that. Does the case manager understand it so that they can relay it to the client and the landlords, and is that all a connection and an understanding of where we're going and how we move forward in the program? Just like I was saying, the landlord-tenant laws are incredibly important to know in your area and to have. We give the entire 10-page report to our clients every time that they come in, and not that they are required to look at it, but at least they have it, and of course we have it right on each one of our desks to let the clients know if something does arise, what they can do and what we can try and do for them. So we have really truly found that progressive engagement does work. It really does. It's just really buying into the idea that the clients will be successful with this short-term funding, and they can do it on their own. Is really just a great piece in that, and to really, really know. And the whole idea of progressive engagement and rapid rehousing is really encouraging self-sufficiency. We absolutely encourage to give as much resources as possible and much skill building as you can, but it is really fast-paced, and we give those skills and we let them try it, but it still remains client-led. If it doesn't work for them, we don't require it, we don't do any of that. If it doesn't work for them and they've got something else that does, we'll run with that as well. But this whole program really, really does encourage self-sufficiency through what the client already has available to them, what they already have in their kind of toolbox to be successful in this program. And then go ahead and go to the next slide. And that is it for mine. I want to thank you again for allowing me to tell our story and everything that we're doing here that we're excited about. And I will go ahead and hand it over to Marilyn.
Thank you, Jackie. So I'm going to talk about the retooling of transitional housing here at TLC in Spokane, Washington. Sheila, could you switch slides? Thank you. So the identified priority populations that we serve at TLC are homeless households with children who are fleeing domestic violence, and homeless households with children who are exiting a chemical dependency program or a mental health institution. Sheila, could you switch slides? Thank you. So our facility, what our facility is like is we're a 3-story historical building on 3 acres. It's formerly an orphanage. It was built in, I believe, 1886. We are a locked facility, so that provides a sense of safety and security for the residents here. The locks are opened by fobs, and we have security cameras on all doors and all floors of our facility. The building's actually owned by Transition, so we don't have the option to do scattered site housing, and we're unable to ship to rapid rehousing. So we're pretty ideal for the population that we serve. We have 16 apartments. They're 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments with a full kitchen and bathroom. The participants furnish them themselves with the help of case management and resources in the community. We have a large family room that we use for groups and activities, celebrations, and also just as a family room for the families and the kiddos. We have a gymnasium that has basketball hoops, and that's good for the kiddos to be able to stay inside and get activity. We have an on-site licensed child care center that is licensed through Department of Early Learning and funded through USDA. We have low staff to child ratio, which allows us to be very effective with high-risk children. And they're trained in circle of security and attachment and bonding. We also have a technology center that has computers and printers and iPads for the kiddos for homework and the residents to access resources they may need. Sheila, could you switch slides? Thank you. So what the selection process used to be here at TLC was families were considered for housing at TLC after they went through a selection process that consisted of kind of a lengthy process. One of the requirements to be housed here was it was clean and sober living, and a participant had to prove that they had been sober for at least 90 days to be considered for housing here. And how that was done was usually they were coming from an institution called Isabella House, so they had verification from their case manager there, or they had to get verification through urinary analysis through NUDA, one of the programs here in Spokane, or they had to get a case manager to show proof that they were clean and sober. A reunification of the family was required to be taking place within 6 weeks of housing. So many of our families are going through a reunification process. The children are coming from foster care, and our facility, because of the safety of it and the structure of it, it's an ideal setting for reunification of families. But if a family didn't have a guarantee that the child would return in 6 weeks, they didn't qualify for housing here, which really created a barrier for the higher need families, because it's kind of a liability for case managers to step out and say that the children will be guaranteed to return. There had to be a staff approval, and so an intake was done, an assessment was made, that was presented to staff. If staff didn't feel that this person was a good fit, or they didn't feel that they would be successful, then they would be denied access to housing here. And we also had to get provider consensus. So all providers that they were working with through DCFS, therapists, mental health, chemical dependency counselors, they all had to agree that they believed that the participant would be successful here at TLC. And also a deposit was required for entry, which was often very difficult to come up with a $200 deposit, but it was required, and participants were denied without. So today, none of these barriers exist. When a referral comes in for an intake from the Homeless Families Coordinated Assessment, we immediately house the participants knowing that they have met all qualifications, and we can house them at TLC. Sheila, would you go to the next slide? Thank you. So the barriers in transitional housing, as I said, there were violations that were means for immediate eviction at TLC. One of those was a relapse from sobriety. If a participant relapsed, they were immediately evicted, given a 3-day notice. Failure to attend required groups and classes. It didn't matter if they were relevant to the participant or if they interfered with other required groups, maybe through DCFS or from school or work. they had to attend those groups and classes. Failure to sign in guests was a violation of program rules, and there were quite a few program rules that really didn't make sense to lead straight to eviction, and failure to pay fees was also means for eviction from TLC. Sheila, would you mind? Thank you. So we've done a lot of programmatic changes over the last few years. One of those is, as a staff, come together on a regular basis to make sure that we lower the barriers to accessing housing here. We understand we are ideal for working with some very high need and at-risk families, and so we don't want barriers to exist that would allow access to those families. We practice the harm reduction model, so if a participant does relapse, we understand that that's part of the process, and sending them back into homelessness probably is not the solution. So we work with them with the resources that we have and the knowledge that we have to help them heal from whatever's happening and heal from what caused them to relapse before we send them into permanent housing, which really needs to be addressed before they go into housing that isn't as secure as we have here. The progressive engagement practices, again, I was hesitant in the beginning to believe that this was the right way to go, but it really is the best approach and has proven time and again to be the best approach. It saves us resources that we would unnecessarily use before, and it also does put the confidence in the hands or on the participant, knowing that they have come this far, and coming through homelessness is a challenge in itself. The fact that they've come through all of that, they do have the potential, and we can help them and again increase the services that we provide as needed. We have shorter transition times. We're hoping for shorter transition times where, as Jackie was stating, the longer we keep them, the longer they, or the longer that we keep a person in homelessness, the longer they stay. And we really want to move them on to permanent housing and make that shorter than the 2 years that it used to take. We have a stronger emphasis on employment and education. We work very hard from the very beginning to identify what it is that the participant, what the family needs, and we have a vocational specialist on site who comes and works with the participants on identifying where they need to go and how they need to move forward, or how they would like to move forward, and assist them in transportation or resources or whatever, the clothing, whatever the needs are. We have a great collaboration with other agencies and resources that just create a stronger community than ever, and also allows us to bring professionals in, and again saves us the resources that we have by that collaboration. We also, as Sheila stated, the relationship with the Spokane Housing Authority has been a tremendous blessing, and we have a voucher program that we're able to access 3 vouchers a month to hopefully move families into permanent housing at a more rapid rate. Sheila, would you change the slide? Thank you. So some of the barriers that we've lowered by looking at the program is deposits and occupancy fees. We understand that when a family's coming from homelessness, that coming up with that deposit's very difficult, and having them seek that deposit at the time of a crisis is not reasonable. So there are no denials based on lack of deposits and fees, and no evictions for unpaid fees. We really work with payment arrangements and good faith of the participants, which really has increased our occupancy fees coming in. We have fewer evictions for program violations. If there's a program violation that isn't directly affecting the safety of our participants and our program, we really try to have a conversation with the participant, explain why it is that we have that rule, and we really try to evaluate what the rules and program requirements, why we have those, and making sure that we're constantly reevaluating that and not making it difficult for somebody to be successful in our program. We have programs and groups that are offered but not required. We have, like as I said, we have groups from all over the community, the specialists in areas such as trauma groups, justice circle, healthy eating, healthy living, different groups like that that we have offered here on site, but they're not required because for some participants, they aren't relevant and they don't have the time with the many requirements that they have in other areas. As I said, any referral coming from from the Housing Family Coordinated Assessment, they are accepted once they reach our place. We know that they've been through the assessment with the HFCA, and so we bring them in for an intake and house them that day. We have no screening out on referrals unless program qualifications are not met for some reason between the referral over from HFCA, or if they have a criminal background that would make them a danger to the children or the participants here in our facility. Thank you, Sheila. The harm reduction model, we work with participants through the struggles rather than, and over the last couple of years, we have seen some huge success in this area that what before didn't make sense to us now doesn't make sense that we would have done it any other way. We work to help the participants through what they're going through, and we work to help them identify and connect with resources that will help to support them in an ongoing manner. We have recovery support groups offered on site that are led by the participants, and they're based on the AA model. Those are quite successful, and we celebrate all recoveries here at TLC. Thank you, Sheila. So what our case management looks like now is it's very client-driven. The client sets up their goals, and the client is responsible to carry through their goals. We utilize the progressive engagement model, of course, and assistance is given as needed and as identified by the participant and the case manager together, mostly by the participant. The housing, we strive to transition residents to permanent housing, and we've been quite successful in that over the last couple of years also. There's a, like I said, strong emphasis on employment and education to help the participants gain independence from services they may be relying on, and also to be self-reliant and recognize their potential through offering the resources that they need to get to that place. We have strong collaboration with community agencies and supports, which builds a strong community for the participants out of TLC, which is very important for their future success. And assistance in navigating required services when involved with the Department of Children and Family Services. As I said, many of our participants are going through a reunification process, and there are a lot of requirements that these families have to prove that they are able to keep their children in their care. So we really work to help them organize that and navigate those services so that they don't lose custody of their children, and that the family successfully goes through a DCFS case and has that closed successfully and in a healthy manner. Sheila, thank you. And so some of the successes that we've seen are more families are obtaining permanent housing. We rarely have a family leave here that isn't going into some sort of permanent housing. We've reduced the length of stay in transitional housing from about 2 years to around 9 months to a year. We have higher employment successes. More families are going in, or more participants are finding employment with the assistance of our vocational specialist, and also the various resources that are coming in from the community. We've reduced evictions tremendously because we don't evict for anything that is not, as I said, a direct danger to the participants or the program. We're strengthening community partnerships by bringing different community and different educational institutions in. We're really building community partnerships that not only has our program being known through these different community members, but also, again, creates a strong community for our participants when they leave here. And again, expanding the support system for our clients through that has been proven to be a very successful thing for our clients. So some of the improved stats, as you see, housing stability, we've gone from 64% of our participants going into permanent housing to 66%. We've increased the income from 29% to, 36%. And the mainstream benefits, where it used to be about 90%, we now 100% of our participants are accessing mainstream benefits.
Marilyn, can I interject back there with that slide? Do you mind if we go back to that, Sheila? Just quickly, I just sort of want to reassert the point that between 2012 and 2014, you also are targeting a much higher need population.
Yes.
So serving a higher need population, you ended up with greater improvements and a shorter time in your program.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you, Sheila. So a review of our successes. The new approach is more empowering for our residents. What used to be a program, what is more of a community now, and an opportunity for participants to gather themselves together after the trauma of homelessness and get things together with the support of a strong staff and a strong community, and a community that is supporting them in their success and able to offer collaboration and partnerships to them that would not have been focus earlier. We have success in achieving permanent housing for our residents. It's much more frequent than it used to be. And again, most of the participants are going into permanent housing situations. The fewer evictions that we have that's less traumatizing on the participants that are here, to not have to see evictions happen for very minor violations that causes fear in the participants as they're trying to move forward and would clearly set somebody back. We have a stronger community through the various meetings offered by a variety of community providers. The participants are participating because they want to and because it's relevant to them, not because we're forcing them to do it anymore. And so it has more meaning to them than it seems, than it did before. We have fewer returns to homelessness because we are working through the difficulties and we are supporting the participant through the process. And so we're not putting them back into a homeless situation. For instance, when a person is to relapse, to evict them, they're more likely going to be homeless again before, and that cycle could repeat, where we're able to stop that, care for them through it, and put them into permanent housing instead. DCFS involved families are achieving greater reunification. We have most of our participants are having their cases closed while here at TLC and before they move into permanent housing. So the success of keeping families together, if that was the only success, would be what we're here for. Fewer incidences are reported. We don't have the incidences that we used to have, which is not very easy to explain, but we just don't have incidences reported such as fighting or violence or instances like that. It's a very safe place to be. The residents often participate in outpatient services for recovery. Once the harm reduction is activated, that they often choose to participate in those outpatient services and are very successful in their recovery through that. We have a stronger staff retention, and I feel that that's due to the staff is no longer put in a position of being punitive. They're allowed to do the work that their heart put them here for, and so their work is more meaningful, and they're not always worried about having to take the step of doing an eviction or turning somebody away or having to battle those decisions regarding families and children that cause strong burnout. And so our staff retention, we have a very strong staff retention, and we have a stable full-time staff of 13 here at TLC. So there's something to be said for that. Fewer defaults on occupancy fees. The participants are paying their occupancy fees. We rarely have to call to ask anymore, and if they do have a difficulty, they don't have a problem coming to us to make payment arrangements, which is really helpful for our budget. And we have an increase in volunteerism that directly affects our families. And I think that's due in part to bringing the community members in and introducing them to our program, introducing them to our participants, and they're finding that they do want to be part of what we have here at TLC. Sheila, would you mind? And thank you very much. There's my contact information if I can help you with anything, and thank you.
Okay, thank you all. So we actually hit 3 o'clock or an hour a little bit ago. So I kind of want to do questions fairly quickly, and hopefully folks will be able to hang on with us a bit. So I have a couple questions. I'm going to go through start at the top. Sheila, one of the questions that I got was essentially around how did you shift the culture to get the transitional housing programs to move towards a more interim approach away from what they had been doing, the same old, essentially with the higher barriers like we heard from Marilyn. How did this shift come about? How did they get convinced to try something different, to go to shorter lengths of stay and move more towards helping people get connected to permanent housing faster?
Well, so through
and
lots
if I could
of
add something, what was
what
was the role of the learning community in that? Maybe to
sure.
add something in there.
You know, I specifically remember we had lots of conversation around this. Once we started identifying this gap in our units that were available, and really wanted to start talking about an interim housing model, we brought it to the learning community. We started talking about it at our Continuum of Care Advisory Committee, and we actually formed a small little work group that was just transitional housing providers and our emergency shelter providers, and we would come together. I'm sure. I'm trying to remember Marilyn, she was there, and it was really painful. We would bring data. We would bring, you know, these are the number of referrals that you received, and these are the numbers of people that you denied. Really hard conversations about and comparing projects to projects, and you know, and I think that although it was painful, and they would look at that, and it would, you know, it would be kind of an embarrassing meeting to be sitting if you had a program that was really denying a lot of people. The people in the room really wanted to serve homeless families. I mean, that's why they were doing what they were doing, and it really just kind of brought to the surface, this is your program rules are becoming a barrier to the people that you want to serve, and it really kind of brought that forward. And through some interesting conversations, it really came full circle where they really kind of bought into the idea, and we were willing to try it. We tried it. We would meet and see how it was working. We really put a lot of communication into that process.
Great. And I actually have a question which I think is quite on point, and it's essentially, the question was, what happens in your community now when somebody who is homeless tonight, what does that look like? And maybe it's worth mentioning what it used to look like versus what it looks like today, because of the changes you made.
Sure. And you know, it's not perfect. It's you know, we're still working on having the availability, immediate availability for shelter. So what it looked like before, kind of what I talked about at the very beginning is, of our 11 programs, people would contact them directly. Often there was not emergent a bed available at that moment, and people would get on a wait list for emergency shelter. We do have one program that serves women with children that will kind of go over capacity. They're a faith-based program, fairly small scale, that have not chosen to participate in coordinated assessment as far as placements go. We do coordinate with them to have assessments at their location for all the other homeless services. So there's a very small window of individuals that can access an emergent bed if they have an immediate need. But right now, when someone comes into HSCA, they go through an assessment. We have a kind of a diversion component trying to help with seeing if they have any resources outside the system. And then they're basically, if they qualify for a shelter bed or a temporary housing bed, they get on the list, and as soon as units become available, people are placed. And our wait list is pretty short. Generally, within a couple of weeks, an individual can access. And in the meantime, we're trying to connect them with our faith-based programs or other resources. So we're still working on that immediate placement, but it certainly has been reduced from the average of 3 months from a previous system.
Right. And you've also, if I recall correctly from your last data, you had fewer unsheltered people than you had in the past.
Definitely, yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a couple of questions for Jackie. One is really quick, if you could provide a reference, and maybe we can do this by email, but a quick reference to the article you said. The longer somebody's in an institution, then the longer they're in an institution. And then actually a couple of people raised a little concern. You said that a lot of the people that you're working with are finding housing on their own. You have the pile of resources and you do lots of relationship building, but they're navigating that housing search part often on their own. What happens if they need help? What happens if they're struggling? Is there something else that you kick into gear if they're having trouble?
Sure. The article one was a good year and a half ago, so I will have to send that to you, Sharon.
Okay, I'll put it in the link to it.
Perfect. But on the other end, so people doing it on their own, so we initially ask that everybody goes out and really does try it, so kind of have that belief in themselves that they can do it and go out and see what the barriers that are coming up. So initially in our intake, we ask if there's anything they want to share, and we give ideas of what usually denies someone based on these, for-profit landlords. So past evictions, bad credit, all those kind of things. And our list of landlords is based off of that. So we have categories that says, do these landlords take evictions, yes or no? Do these landlords allow for some kind of wiggle room if there's bad credit? Different things like that, so that the client doesn't get as discouraged. We really just say, don't waste your time if that's going to come up and there's a no in that box. Don't waste your time with that landlord. When they come to us and they are struggling and say that it's really hard, they're not finding anything, we really go over talking points as the initial thing. Like, when you talk to a landlord, what are they saying as the reason for your denial? It might be something they didn't disclose with us in the beginning so that we could give a better landlord referral for someone that has multiple things on their background and different stuff like that. And we really go over kind of that initial piece of how are you presenting to this landlord. And the basis of that is the landlord wants to know how they're going to be paid. They now have heard about rapid rehousing. They know it doesn't last forever. They want to know how you're going to pay it. How do you let them know that coming to them with no income, you will be able to pay the rent in the end? And we talk about that with them, and we have found a lot of success in that, to say, let's write down talking points. You talk to me as if I'm the landlord, and go over how you're going to tell them and make them believe that you are going to be successful and they are going to get their money every month. Really, I think we forget the basis of kind of the things we grew up with. We know how to talk on the phone. We know these talking points. We know how to sell ourselves. And this marginalized society really doesn't know necessarily how to do those things, and doesn't believe in themselves enough to say, well, can I do it? And we really work through those issues. Yes, you can do it. We've seen it every day. People come in with no income and get housed and be successful in this program. Own it. Tell me how you see yourself being successful, and let's talk about how we make that a reality. when it comes to the point of we've tried everything, which I'm not going to lie does, and will happen, of we've tried it, it doesn't work, the 30 days and maybe even longer has come and gone. It's a really difficult conversation of, is this the right program for you? Is this the right fit? And we really do that diversion piece. Do you have anyone, anywhere that we could try and make a contact with that would be really, really upset that you're in this situation? Could you stay with them a little while and possibly save up some money and then possibly come back through when you are more ready? Now that you know this program, know what it's going to require of you, maybe it's not a good time right now, but the great thing about our new coordinated entry is it's not this 3-month wait list. It's really a prioritization list. So if you find you're ready in a month and want to come back through, if you score in the range again, just like you did before, we can get you right back through. So really it's the idea of maybe this isn't a good fit for you at the time if it comes to that point. But we, of course, want to try to give all the resources we can before that happens.
Okay, Marilyn, I have a couple quick questions for you. One is, how many units do you have in your program? And also, if you could comment on have you had challenges with having a harm reduction model in a small number of units while you're also helping to support people in their sobriety? Does one sort of undermine the other? How does that work?
Well, we have 16 units in our program, and the working, that was a question that came up with us as well as staff for the harm reduction model, because we did have that concern. But it seems like even when we have not had success with the harm reduction model, it was an exit. The one time that it wasn't successful, it was an exit that was very we still exited them into a safe place. And so, but what I found is that it's a sense of comfort for the participants here, not to give them permission to relapse, but it gives them an opportunity to support that person through that, and it takes them out of the fear of what will happen, which often does trigger relapse in and of itself. And so we've seen such success with it here. It hasn't, it doesn't seem to affect the other participants negatively, and we haven't seen a situation where we had more participants fall because of somebody else's relapse. Again, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but I think that support just is a successful way of working with the participants through it. And of course, there's a lot of conversation, and there's a lot of conversation that goes on with the participant about how it does bring a vulnerability to the people who are in recovery and how that can affect them. And those conversations seem to bring an awareness and an understanding that is part of the community that is created here through the more loving approach of working with the participants rather than giving up on somebody when they do fall back a little bit.
So, I mean, it's not the first time that I've heard this. It's quite an interesting thing, but it's like when you relinquish control and give the power back to them. I'm not going to be in charge of your sobriety by making you do urines all the time. The sobriety is up to you, and you need to make the choices. You actually have more control, or the place is, more peaceful, it seems. It's not the first time I saw that observation, but it's not often what we would have expected, when you start.
It was definitely, there was a lot of resistance here, and it's been a couple of years of really just a lot of conversation, a lot of tough conversations, like Sheila had said, say we're going to try this, and as we tried it, it just worked. And we honestly, none of us can really see ever having done it another way when we all didn't understand how it was going to turn out. But like I said, it's a much happier staff. It's a much quieter program. There's so many fewer incidences and evictions that it definitely has proven to be a more rational approach for sure.
So I have a couple of just sort of logistical questions for Sheila, I think, that we might be able to answer kind of quickly. One is, raised the question, one person raised the question about domestic violence. I just want to say that Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence is doing some phenomenal work about across the state of Washington around trying rapid rehousing with domestic violence survivors. How are you working in your system, rapid rehousing? How are you working with domestic violence survivors and providers, and how has the shift benefited them, or has there been any negative impacts from reducing access to forms of housing or homeless assistance that they might have preferred or benefited from?
Well, I don't think there's been any negative impacts on the domestic violence population with our changes in the system. Somebody that's needs a shelter bed for domestic violence because they're having they're an imminent risk. Obviously, they access that outside of our coordinated assessment system. But in our early planning, we brought our DV provider. We have one major DV provider here in Spokane to the table and kind of talked about how the process would work. So the way that works with them is obviously they get immediate access to DV resources if within the first week, because many of the households that they serve, they're able to secure alternate housing back into their own unit once they get they bring in the legal system and they're able to get them back into their own unit. But for those people that they can't, that really have truly become homeless because of their domestic violence situation, they then are an entry point for the homeless system, so they can access the other resources through coordinated assessment. They can do assessments there, so they're not they're able to work directly with those clients and give them the resources to access within the homeless system. We don't have a particular rapid rehousing program for domestic violence victims. We have been looking at implementing something like that locally. We just haven't gotten that far. But I do know that our agencies partner really well together and work to help with the domestic violence program, provide that support if they're getting housed in a different location, if they're getting housed through rehousing or in one of our temporary interim housing programs. They work really well together to help support those families. Not sure if that answered your question, but
no, that's great. So and we're going to have, for the person interested in that, we're going to have some domestic violence specific webinars for rapid rehousing. So very quickly, how many staff are in the how many people are being rapidly rehoused each month, and how many staff are dedicated to rapid rehousing?
Oh, wow. So each month we've seen it increase dramatically of how many people are coming through our doors. I could also send you some stats on that, Sharon. As far as, and with that, I want to let everybody know that we also have gotten 3 extra grants to help us support this as well. So we've had an increased capacity because of the increase in funding from different funding sources. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 full-time case managers set up to do case management full-time for rapid rehousing here.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today and hanging in there towards the end. And we will be sending out the PowerPoint and a recording of this webinar in our newsletter next week and in our Rapid Rehousing newsletter tomorrow. And we will let you know about the next of this series. So thank you, Sheila, Jackie, and Marilyn, and congratulations on all of your successes.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.